I saw Al Smith, Tom Brady. Did you make it? We're doing this again. J.C. Vega. Gerald Williams. Gerald Williams from Cisco. Gerald is not here. If you all see Gerald, give him a hard time. He said he was going to be here last night. Last night he said he'd be here today. Like, maybe some of you remember 4 years ago when we were here, and we were, hanging out in the evening we weren't out there that late. But, I start off with this thing about buffalo hunters, right? The whole network security. Our network is only as strong as the weakest link, right? So I tell the buffalo theory story from Cheers, right? How, I forgot who's at the bar explaining to the mailman, and it goes like this, in the buffalo herds, when the buffalo are hunted, it's always the slowest and weakest that get killed, making the herd faster, right? And naturally, when you drink alcohol, it's the slowest and weakest brain cells that die from alcohol, making you smarter, right? And that's why you feel smarter after drinking a beer, right? So that was the story that I led with. And Gerald, couldn't make it into the session because he drank too much the night before, apparently. So then when he came in, I said, here comes the smartest man in the room. And so that's the context of Gerald Williams. So I said, tomorrow, 11:45, it's not an 8 o'clock session, and yet he can't make it. Okay. All right. Whatever. Oh, whatever. And then a few other folks said they would be here.
Keep going. I don't want to interrupt your riff.
Yeah.
It's a roast.
So Allison from Trace said she'd be here today. Allison, Brett and John. Did y'all make it? No? You said you'd be here. Sonny? Sonny, you here? I can't hear you if you are. How about Tracy Mills from HPE? No. All these unkept promises. Dan O'Neill? No.
Someone clap.
Jake Kwan? Craig Hansen? Last night Craig said he'd be here. Aaron Horrell? Aaron? Oh, I'm sure. Todd Beringhouse? No. How about Tammy Garcia? Verizon. Okay.
Go. We had it here.
Oh, all right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, God. Give her a hand. How about Hack Nguyen? Where's Hack? No Hack. Any work for me? Ken Witt. Here, sir. Oh.
Hey, all right.
Okay, that's 2 for 30-something. Eric Gladman from Sands? No.
He's out in the hall.
Jim Terry, my former boss. Cubic. Rich Gleason. Oh, oh, Jim. Rick, okay, good. All right, there's Mark Parker. How about Patrick Kerr from Applied Research Corporation? No. Carl Teagan. We all know Carl. And then Mark from Illumio, microsegmentation. He said he was so important to this. All right, well, these are all the folks that promised that they'd be here. How about Teresa Pines from CrowdStrike? Mark in the back. I see you, Mark. Okay, it's dark. All right, okay. I'm sorry, John.
No.
Back
That's
to
all right. Yeah, I'm here. I'm
roll.
present. Ladies and gentlemen, General Yee.
All right.
Sir, Angie,
joining us
Angie
from
and I are
DISA,
here.
let me just offer our thanks for the panel for being here. We know that took a while to get it organized because of COVID and mission and all those other things, and you couldn't find the sunglasses. But now I think we're squared away. We have our lights in our eyes, but we have a good message to present, and I offer it to General Yee. You can also, at the end, we'll give you 10 minutes for another riff. All right? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Well, it's not just me, obviously. We have Dr. Angie Landris and Steve Wallace, two very dynamic individuals that are part of the DISA team. I'll do a little intro and then hand it off to Steve and Angie to talk about what Thunderdome is. But I'll just start with maybe a little bit of history, not archaeology, not that far back, but I'll say that in the beginning there was darkness, right? No YouTube, no MTV, no TikTok, right? We only had like Gilligan's Island, I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched, right? Those good shows. And then at some point, the cyber folks appreciate this. ARPANET came along, right, which is the beginning of the internet. And when we, and General Lawrence would appreciate this, when we, first went into, the networking part of IT for us, it was, at the base post camp station level where they had their own little networks and they all had their own little top level architecture stacks that went straight into, the internet. People were using AOL for email and all kinds of stuff. And then at some point, we got the great idea, let's like connect it all, right? And we kind of, birthed the DODIN when we connected it all. And to protect the DODIN, we, built internet access points, IAPs. And that was our perimeter defense, and that was the birth of the perimeter defense for us. About 10 years ago, the Army got this idea with some year-end money during General Lawrence's time where we didn't spend it all for OCO, and we gave it to DISA to make regional security stacks that became joint regional security stacks with that money we couldn't spend in the Army, and it was a great idea. And that was the birth of the mid-tier, the JRSS stack, we refer to as the mid-tier security, right? And then, around that time, we started this thing called HBSS, Host-Based Security Stack, or system, right? Trying to protect the endpoint. And that became, more or less our cybersecurity architecture. It was a network-centric solution for defending the network, right? We had the perimeter, we had the mid-tier, and we had the endpoint. Characterized by an IAP, a JRSS stack at the mid-tier, and then, the endpoint, HBSS. And that became pretty good for us for a while. And life was good. We had YouTube and whatever we had clogging up our network. But then maybe like 5 years ago, we started, hearing these new words, like 0 day. Who heard of that before? Or, ransomware. Okay, that's a new one. And phishing and malicious links. And those all became, regular vernacular of everyday folk, not just the IT people, right? And so we had to look for something different in order to protect our networks. And so a couple of years ago, this effort of zero trust, we had to find a new buzzword, right? But it couldn't be just a buzzword. And so for 2 years, actually, in concert with NSA, Cybercom, all the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, working through trying to find out what's next. How do we evolve the cybersecurity architecture? And with the notion that the adversary is already inside the network. And just a matter of, when the adversary chooses to do something, they were already in. That was our going in premise with zero trust. And last year, after a year plus of effort putting that together, we got that thing together and finally approved, adopted by OSD in February this past year. And so we have the zero trust reference architecture. Angie and Steve were a big part of that. Last 6 months has been spent, really, with, kind of joking a little bit, but with Angie and Steve and others in, a closed room where we feed them pizza under the door, trying to work with our integrated team, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, to make that actually a reality for us, right? No kidding. I mean, so what we're about to talk about today, this thing called Thunderdome, really is what's next in a very real, I will say, programmatic way. resource informed in the Palm, beginning this year and in a very real way in 2023. No kidding. So if you're asking what's next for JRSS, this is it. In addition to a lot more stuff. So if your industry, you're trying to skate to the puck, then today this is the first time we're talking about this publicly. Angie and team, and with the leadership of Chris Barnhurst, our new executive deputy director, who replaced Tony Montemurano, have been meeting with all stakeholders in the Pentagon. Joint Staff J6, they just briefed last week. He's on board. He'll be speaking tomorrow. All the service CIOs have bought into it. And so thank you for joining us here today, because this is the first time we're doing this. And so we may be a little clunky out the gate because we're not using any, let's just say, acquisition-sensitive slides, just to be frank, to be careful about it. But you should have a pretty good idea when we're done today, about what we're doing. All right? It's not going to happen overnight. As I said, it's over the Palm, but some heavy, focus on different ways of providing security to the network that is more data-centric. How'd I do with that?
Sir, you blew it away.
I think we're done here,
Yeah,
guys.
we
They
can
work
now.
for me, that's why. So I've not talked any details yet about what it is. So that's just kind of the opening. So Steve, over to you to start to explain to us Zero Trust
Sure.
and
So,
Thunderdome.
and I'll be frank. I am grumpy beyond my years, and the concept of zero trust, when the buzzwords started really catching a lot of steam, to be frank, I kind of tapped out, right? Because and I can bet you, and this is only a friendly, gentle jab at our industry partners here, but if you go down and walk the floor right now, you'll find a lot of zero trust, zero trust, zero trust, right? The reality is zero trust is really just a set of design concepts. It's not a product. You don't just go and buy it, plug it in, and go out and have beers, right? It's far more than that. So when we started stepping back and looking at where we wanted to go with these concepts, we've been out, we talked to a lot of industry, and even talking to a company like Google, and you can go out and read their Beyond Corp papers. It took for them, it was a 7-year journey, right? For a company that owns most all of their source code, has a relatively young IT infrastructure, and is pretty doggone agile. It took them 7 years, and it was based on an infiltration and what they saw as an existential threat. And after sitting with them, frankly, I was back in. I was like, okay, we know how we're going to get here. But we can't sit in this room and think that it's, to General Yee's point, it's going to happen in the FIDEP. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take many years. Thunderdome is but one wheel in that machine to help us get there. So we want to make sure we're very clear about that when we talk about Thunderdome, it's not just, okay, we're going to implement this Thunderdome thing, we're going to improve the network, and then we can all tap out and go home. That's far from the truth. We got a lot of work to do. Thunderdome's just a part of that. So really excited about what Thunderdome is capable of and going to do for us. It's really us stepping back and looking at the entire user session from the endpoint all the way through to when they access the data. So, and taking into account everything along the way. So today, many people are very familiar with what we had with enterprise email with DEE, where, in a lot of our applications, where as long as you provide your CAC, you have a valid CAC, we authenticate that CAC, make sure you have access to the system, and away you go. You could be coming from the most virus-riddled computer, from the most, unfriendly country in the world, but we'll let you in because you provided a valid CAC. And the concept behind Thunderdome is breaking that and really taking all of the other attributes about the user session into account, the device they're coming from, the potentially the geolocation or network the user's coming from, analytics about how have we seen them before, are we seeing them move around, those kinds of things. A lot of these things aren't necessarily new, but it's sort of making that, adding that into the entire equation. So, Angie, did you have anything?
Just that it's an honor to be here. I spent the last couple years, I have terrible timing just in life in general. I took this job as a Defensive Cyber Operations Chief at DISA, or also known as the J34, and literally a couple months later, COVID came. So I spent the last couple years, living in a skiff, fighting the adversary. And, the adversary is very real. We are in a contested battle space. We are in a place where people are attacking us all the time. And, defending the DISN and the DODIN, we take that very seriously at DISA. So I spent a lot of time getting to know the adversary and understanding the threats and attacks. And then Mr. Barnhurst asked me if I'd come do this crazy little project for a couple months. And they really did feed us pizza under the door. But I was so fired up to do it because I just was like, wow, wait a minute, we're gonna do DevSecOps? We're gonna put security in before we build stuff? Awesome. So I was really excited about that. Wow, that makes my job as a DCO chief so much better, right? So I'm really excited about Thunderdome. It's a really cool program. When we're in that room, in those small groups, really trying to figure out what capabilities we were going to include. We had spent over 2 years with NSA developing a reference architecture. So now it was really time to implement. Okay, this is not a concept anymore. How do we get after it? How do we fund it? How do we resource it? So coming up with these solutions that are modern and relevant and at pace with industry is really exciting. The SASE capability is just a couple years old. It's not something that's all over the DOD. We have SD-WAN, we have security containers at the edge and application, cyber analytics that actually provide DCO in the cloud, and then comply to connect. So, just putting all those things together and actually creating a security architecture and network that is really relevant and modern and is going to protect the warfighter is honestly the honor of my life. So,
Except for your son who's in the crowd.
oh yeah, that kid. Yeah, my child's here. He's back there. He's really the honor of my life.
So let me just paint a picture here, because I know you're all trying to figure out, okay, so what is this thing and how are we going to, so I'm going to maybe paint the picture of how we'll implement, and then we'll talk about the components of it, because you're all wondering what's going to happen to JRSS, right? Especially the Army, So JRSS, this is going to happen both for SIPR and NIPR, right? And SIPR is actually the priority as a warfighting network for us. But we have not implemented JRSS 100%. We have not implemented JRSS SIPR, right? And so what will happen is, going forward at a certain point, beginning very soon, instead of implementing JRSS in certain regions, this will be implemented. These components that will provide the security necessary for that portion of the DODIN, right? So imagine, if you will, that there's X number of security stacks that we're still implementing, and the ones that haven't been implemented are still using their legacy cybersecurity capabilities, right? So for those, instead of implementing JRSS, this will be implemented, right? So things like SD-WAN and secure access, secure edge capabilities, which Steve's description is VPN on steroids, I guess. So those regions will begin with this moving forward that we have. That's the plan, right? So with that in mind, I think that helps you to understand that everything's not going away overnight. That stuff still will be maintained and operated. But as we move forward, we transition to this. And it's really an evolution of the cybersecurity requirements. So with that in mind, I mentioned two things that you mentioned. Tell us a little bit about, either of you, about what SASE actually is and what SD-WAN does for us. Those are the two big components, I think.
You think, or you want me to?
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay.
You got it.
All right. So SASE is Secure Access Service Edge. It's a reasonably, a new concept. There's quite a number of vendors in this space, as I'm sure many of you in this room probably are in that space. There's quite a number of vendors, and each one seems to accomplish it a little differently. But to General Yu's point, it's kind of VPN on steroids, right? So the example that I give is, your more traditional VPNs. That's kind of like the DC Beltway is today, right? But when the DC Beltway was actually originally envisioned, there was actually an inner ring and an outer ring envisioned. So today we really just have that inner ring and we bring everything to it. And then if you need to go from one area to another, you ride that Beltway and you pop off on the other side. And an example of that is when we had CVR, right? So when we had the CVR environment, many folks were still working remotely. They were VPNing, they were tunneling back into the network because they were doing it from their GFE devices. We were tunneling them back into the network, popping them out of the concentrators just to turn around and send them back out the other direction over to the cloud provider. We were adding little to no security benefit in doing that, but adding 40, 50, 60 milliseconds to every transaction of the user. So we were inhibiting the user's experience, and especially when we start talking about the greater use of real-time services with things like Teams that we're seeing today, or WebEx, or whatever you want to use. Where SASE really starts to come in is it becomes that outer ring of the beltway, if you will. Let's get the user onto the fabric more quickly. It will not be necessarily DOD proper fabric, but it will be a commercial fabric. Get them onto that backbone and that fabric more quickly. And then through the use of microsegmentation, we can start to direct the user's traffic and I don't want to say limit, but tailor their experience based on the endpoint that the user's coming from and attributes about the user and all those sorts of zero trust concepts that we kind of talked about before. So SASE really introduces a lot of those capabilities and concepts, and that's one of the reasons we're pretty excited about it. We think we can improve the user's experience overall, and then also provide a better security experience. Now SD-WAN becomes very important because when we started talking about this problem, we broke, frankly, JRSS into two pieces. We talked about the security aspect of it, and we talked about the network side of it. So the SASE and the software-defined security stacks sort of cover the security side of things. However, we still had that network and routing component to deal with. So we want to use SD-WAN to help us with that. That's becoming increasingly important too, as we're more closely integrating the fabric with a lot of the commercial providers. Right now we have the cloud access points. Don't necessarily see them going away anytime soon. However, we need a tighter mesh between our network and the commercial providers network because the cloud access points are our choke point at the moment. So that's where SD-WAN starts to become very important, and the whole notion that we have today with if I want to send a print job to the printer that is 15 feet from me, I send the print job 100 miles round trip just to come back and pop out of that printer. We want something that's a bit more, performant, if you will, or logical, and SD-WAN helps us to buy some of those things.
Let me just maybe kind of double tap on the SD-WAN piece. So when the Army went to JRSS, we went to these regional security stacks, got rid of the TLA stacks, and so to Steve's point, local traffic no longer stayed local. And in some cases, in some installations, we actually left a firewall back on base so that print jobs wouldn't go, to another state to come back. Yeah. And that really kind of, was not useful because we're one more device in the network, right? And so what we're doing in a way is we're kind of keeping that local traffic local once again through a software-defined wide area network. And so, it's kind of back to the future in a way because we had in the past, IPNs and TLAs, and so we're kind of bringing that local traffic back again, which makes a lot of sense, but keeping the security local. I'd like Dr. Landris to talk a little bit about, how we're going to do this. There's more to talk about in terms of components, but can you tell us a little bit about, the OTA that we have and the way ahead and how this is going to happen in the next year?
Yes, sir. But before I do that, I just want to tell you how cool I think SD-WAN is because it can actually control your traffic. You can choose to send traffic one path, like streaming media a certain way, and you can choose to send FTP traffic another way. So that's really cool. It's highly available, highly redundant. And for a distributed workforce that we now have to deal with post-COVID, with teleworking, it's really an optimal solution. So with that being said, now I'll tell you about the other transaction authority, which is our contract vehicle. What is an OTA? An OTA is a lot different than a traditional FAR-based contract because we don't have to obey the FAR. So that leaves us a lot of flexibility to be able to choose non-traditional defense contractors who actually specialize in these technologies. No offense to all the traditional defense contractors out there, but they specialize in these technologies out in large banks and other industry enterprises, and they do a really good job at it. So typically OTAs are used when there's something out in industry that's been done really well, and it's really modern, it's an emerging technology, and there's nothing really at the Department of Defense where that's been deployed. So we used an OTA. We wrote the RFI and got like almost 60 responses back, which is a lot. We graded those on technical merit just to see kind of how everything fleshed out, to get an idea, validate some of our assumptions that we made in those closed door sessions. Good news is we're not that dumb. We were able to validate our assumptions. And then we went out with what's called a request for white papers. It's a little bit different than an RFP, but very similar. And those responses are due back on 3 September. And once we get those responses back, we have a group of engineers that are ready, and they're from every service: Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, a couple of defense agencies, and then I have some scattered throughout DISA that are all government engineers that are going to grade these responses on technical merit first, and then we'll down select and start looking at them from a cost perspective. So I'm really excited to see what comes back from the vendor community. But what's really great about an OTA is when you go to execute, which Steve and I actually did execute an OTA before with cloud-based internet isolation, you're prototyping on a production network. So you get the goodness of an IATT and the quickness of an IATT, interim authority to test, but you're able to test it on the production network, pivot when things don't work, refine your requirements along the way, change directions as you see fit without the lengthy time that it takes to modify a contract through a FAR-based methodology.
And if I could add to that, for the civilian folks in the room and the military folks in the room, the beauty for us, and I'll talk about the CBII one for a moment, we didn't end up where I thought we would when we started, right? When we entered into that original prototype phase, I thought we had it all figured out. By the end, a year later, we were in a very different place because we had learned, right? We had learned, the vendor had learned, that kind of thing. We were able to evolve in a much more flexible way. And so the same thing goes to the vendor community here as well, is that gives you the opportunity that over the course of that prototype, the government's going to be working through and figuring out, okay, well, this isn't working for us. So when you get to that final, the final, oh gosh, what do we call it? The
Contract award?
Well, thank you.
Production contract?
The final production contract, when we get to that final production contract, we can then have something that's more amenable to all of us, right? And it's not the traditional way the government would have gone out, and the example I keep giving about this one and the other ones is, the government tends to go out and dictate, I want a 6x6 box, and I want it this shade of gray, right? What we're doing here with Thunderdome is we're very purposely, and maybe some of you hate us for it, I don't know, but what we're purposely being a little bit more vague because we want to see what in the heck industry has to say. We don't want to presuppose and prescribe a solution that maybe the government doesn't fully understand yet. So we want to use this process to help us grow and help us, evolve, that type of thing, but at the same time, see what in the heck industry has to offer, and then we'll find the way and we'll kind of meet there in the middle. But that is the beauty of the OTA process that we've really come to enjoy.
And since you mentioned cloud-based internet isolation, or CBII, I think it's worth talking a bit about that because that actually fits into the zero trust environment, right? And who's all familiar with CBI? Raise your hand. Several of you, right? So the idea here is that instead of browsing on the endpoint, you're browsing from the cloud, right? So you have a connection to a point in the cloud, and from that point in the cloud, you open a browsing session, and you're just looking at a video stream essentially from your endpoint. It's not real browsing on the endpoint. It's like a VDI solution, right? Like a thin client in a way. So the goodness is if you click on a malicious link using cloud-based internet isolation, then it detonates in the cloud, not in the DODIN, right? So I use the phrase thinking outside the DODIN when we're doing something like this, because literally you've moved the risk from inside the DODIN to outside. So no need to, to have the security precautions, the sensors, et cetera, at the IAP, because that traffic's not coming through. And when you do bring a download, then when you do download something, it will go through all the sensors. So CBI is very much in line with this zero trust architecture.
And we saw about a 70% reduction in the downloads just on DISA's network when we implemented. And so to your point, really CBII was about the trusted endpoint talking to the untrusted internet or network. Thunderdome is more about the trusted endpoint talking to trusted, applications or data, right? So they do interrelate, but that's sort of where we're going and where we're building out. As CBII was the sort of the cornerstone of that, and then Thunderdome builds atop that, but in a slightly different way for a different set of use cases.
And CBII is already in production, and it's in the process of being deployed DOD-wide. We should be about 30% complete by the end of this fiscal year, and then we'll step on the gas and probably finish up, sometime early next year. And both Angie and Steve were instrumental in getting us that through an OTA. So we're leveraging that experience to take the next step with an OTA. A big part of Thunderdome and Zero Trust is, identity, credential, and access management. And Angie, maybe you could talk a bit about how that ties into Thunderdome and Zero Trust and what we're doing.
Absolutely, sir. So ICAM is really, I kind of see it as the foundation for Thunderdome, because everything kind of revolves around identifying or verifying the identity of the user and the device they're on. That's really the first step. So ICAM is absolutely foundational to Thunderdome. It's actually something that DISA already has a roadmap for. It's an enterprise solution. We actually prototyped it this past fiscal year. And Thunderdome's going to give it the capability to augment. But what's interesting about ICAM is that you don't have it. ICAM's much bigger than Thunderdome. Thunderdome's actually just going to kind of leverage ICAM as a service. But yeah, ICAM's definitely foundational to the concepts of Zero Trust.
And so it most certainly is. And frankly, I've been in the department now for about 10 years. Before that, I was a contractor elsewhere within the government. And from afar, I was doing identity stuff, but from afar, I actually always admired the work that the department had done with the common access cards, right? At this point, the CAC and our use of the CAC is about 15 years old. And as part of the ICAM program, we're looking at how we can expand to other methods of authentication. So it's one of the things that, through the ICAM program, we now have, I don't want to say thanks to the pandemic, but because of the pandemic and thanks to CVR, we had a year's worth of data to look at to see how username, password, and multi-factor authentication, in that case, the text-based or phone call-based approach worked in a real production environment. And it was pretty interesting, kind of what we saw from that. So, that will certainly be part of our strategy going forward. Other form factors of authentication, the rest of the world did not pick up on the notion of the smart card, but you do have other options out there, things like fast identity online, FIDO. We have other options, and this is where we're going to be relying pretty heavily, Thunderdome will, on our ICAM program and where the department wants to go with authentication and credentialing and those types of things going forward. So we're pretty excited about how they all kind of play together.
So without putting a chart up on the wall, we're going to maybe succinctly try to talk you through, what we're referring to as the 7 pillars of Zero Trust as the department sees it. I know that, some places may have 5 pillars, another place may have 10 pillars. Well, the department has 7 pillars. That's what we have. And we're using those just to organize our way ahead, right? And whether one is in one pillar or another pillar, it doesn't matter. We're just using that construct to organize our way ahead. And so we have 7 pillars, and we actually have 7 capabilities aligned to those to create this zero trust environment way ahead, right? And as Angie already said, a big part of this is being able to, no kidding, get after identity, credential, and access management. That's been we've always known that to be like the hard thing to do. And we've been working on that for several years in the department. And so, this, we believe, is the time to really, step on the gas for that because it is critical. So maybe, Steve, you could step through the 7 pillars. Then maybe Angie, you could talk the 7.
You can phone a friend if you need to.
It's quiz time, folks. Let's see how many of these 7 pillars Steve gets. All right, so we already talked about the user, right? We talked about our work with ICANN. We talked about strongly identifying the user. The next is really the device, and we mentioned, is this a government furnished device? Is this does it check out? Is it properly defended? Is it up to spec? That kind of thing. We talk about defending the data, right? So the other side of the equation, and ultimately we are trying to marry the user up with the data that they need. Well, that data needs to be tagged, and we need to know, even at the most basic form, are we talking about unclass, FOUO, CUI, secret, top secret, whatever caveats. But even deeper than that, the deeper information about the data. And the data tagging has been a problem now for decades. And frankly, it's gotten a bit better. There are a lot more tools on the market now that I think that can help with that. We're by no means clear, and we found the solution, that kind of thing. But tagging of that data is certainly critical. The analytics of that user session. So, not just the things about the user, but the things about the data, or the things about the endpoint, the things about the data. Being able to run the analytics against all of that user's behavior. Another one of the other pillars is network. And did the user, they were here in Augusta today, and 5 minutes from now they show up in Moscow. Well, there's probably a problem there. So we want to, look at be able to do the analytics against the data. All right, I'm starting to run dry here.
You only missed one: automation and orchestration.
All right, so I just took that one for granted.
That's my favorite one, so I'm sad that you missed it.
So I just take for granted the fact that everybody automates, right? We're all fully automated and life is wonderful.
Not in the federal government.
Oh, okay. Shoot.
So I'll just read those off so that if anyone's taking notes, they didn't miss it. It was the user, the device, the network, the applications, data, analytics, and then automation and orchestration. So nothing new, but really it's looking at those all together holistically, and then the 7 capabilities. We talked about a few already, but Dr. Landers, if you can kind of take us through the 7 capabilities or focus areas that we're working at in parallel.
Awesome. So obviously there's SASE, which is really cool. It helps us get rid of the VPNs. It helps us kind of extend the perimeter from the user all the way to the data edge. It helps us with conditional access. It helps us with verifying the identity of the user and the device, as well as ICANN. And then you know how I feel about SD-WAN. That's also pretty amazing technology. It's really going to speed up the user's experience. So it's really going to help the user really feel like they're on a modern network without some of the latency problems we currently see. We're going to put virtual security stacks both in front of the applications and at the customer edge point of presence. So I kind of see the combination of SASE and the virtual application-based security containers, replacing the security functions of the JRSS, or evolving really the security functions of the JRSS, and then the edge-based security stacks that are at the customer edge point of presence. Those kind of help like a JBCE would, kind of, replace that kind of portion of JRSS. And then we have ICAM, which we've already beat that horse to death. Comply to Connect, really cool technology, something we're using. I think we actually already have a milestone plan and a vendor on board for that. And then my favorite part is cyber situation awareness. Why? Because my heart and soul bleeds for DCO. I really feel that a good defense for your data is super important in this day and age. Nobody wants a big iron footprint anymore. It's very expensive to tech refresh. It's almost impossible, right, to keep it tech refreshed, to keep it STIG, to keep it patched. So, having a data-centric environment and being able to understand what that data is telling you and what your sensor tools are sensing is so important to fight the fight. You've got to know what's going on in your network. And right now, with a distributed workforce and tons of devices all over the place, all over the world, it's very hard to do that. And this architecture kind of pulls all of that together and brings it in very nicely into a modern security and network architecture.
The only thing I'd add on there is when you talk about the security stacks, a lot of folks ask, well, what the heck is that? That's really analogous to where we are today with the DoD DMZ concept. So the DoD DMZ guidance has been out there for a number of years now and needs to be modernized. And this is really a modernized approach to that. Whether the workload be on-prem or off-prem, where have you, we're looking for a more consistent approach with respect to how we defend those applications and that data.
And I would say what Angie just described in those 7 capabilities, in some way, is not new to a lot of folks in this room, because you had already been trying to advocate for doing things in a more modern way. And so this is kind of also in response to that, incorporating what is already available and what is already in use in many cases. But we had to sit down and come up with the architecture, come up with Thunderdome, a way to incorporate this, a way to demonstrate over the POM, over the FIDUP, how we're going to be able to make that happen with essentially no new money, right? How are you going to do that? Well, we have a lot of investments, and we have to reallocate to be able to do that. And so a tremendous amount of work, even in the last 6 months. I know the last 2 years, Joe Nakasone and Cybercom were pushing hard with Zero Trust pilots over the last 2 years. And so thanks to that push as well, we are where we're at today with a lot of great work. I'm not sure if y'all have questions or not, so I do want to, stop now and ask if there's any questions, and we can entertain those.
Sir, thank you. We do have a number of questions from the audience. A reminder to our attendees, we have questions here. The email address is on the screen in the corner. The first question from the audience is, how does Thunderdome work with JADC2 and Information Advantage and sharing information with coalition partners?
Do you want me to grab that?
Have a ball.
Awesome.
I can help too. But
I know General Yee spoke for a second about how we're prioritizing SIPR. We are rolling them both out at the same time. It's difficult to get modernized solutions on SIPR. There's a lot of permission you have to get to do that, and that takes a while. So we're actually coming up with ways to kind of build out the back end of SIPR while we roll out NIPR as well. But JADC2 data sharing is really important because as a defender, it's the SIPR is the network we fight on. It's it's the one that really needs to be protected. It's the one that probably doesn't have the most robust security architecture. So we want to build out a gray network, enable, that would help enable JADC2 data sharing requirements, putting that cyber analytic tool, that DCO in the cloud kind of function on NIPR and SIPR allows us to also do that. Also working with US Cybercom to try to understand what they're doing with their unified platform, as well as DISAs, and really thinking about things smartly instead of just kind of doing what we always have done. It's, you know, our legacy way of security is to dump a bunch of products at the different tiers of the network and hope that that redundancy provides defense in depth. And while that has worked in the past to keep the adversary out, the adversary you know, has evolved, and they're no longer necessarily attacking in that area. So, you know, really we need to start being able to block at the application, at the applications. And to be honest with you, from sitting in the DCO chair for a while, people get really angry when you block their websites. So, you know, this really does take care of a lot of those unnecessary blocking and unblocking actions, as well as helps enable the warfighter by being able to share data across the board, being able to automate a lot of that scanning and compliance so you can start doing like continuous ATOs, and just being a lot more agile as defenders.
And I'd add that something that we're going for as modern as JADC2 requires a modern method for authentication, identification, and access to resources in general. So we you know, the same old throwing a proxy up and then, you know, requiring a CAC to get through it is not sufficient. We need to be able to tailor the user's experience to the data that they're being accessed. It's a very, very data-centric approach. So, you know, we need a modernized methodology in order to help with that.
All right, next question.
Thank you. As an aside here, before we get to the next question, the smartest man in the room has now checked in.
Where's Gerald?
Gerald Williams was sitting in on a leadership development panel, but
Oh,
he is
sure.
here now.
Where's Gerald? Raise your hand, Gerald. Stand up. Oh, yeah, you're in the back, though, huh? Hey, at least last time he had, you know, enough to come to the front and sit down. This time he's in the back, sneak in.
He tried to sneak in, yeah.
He had nothing but nice things to say about you at the beginning, though.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Ah, Teresa. All right, Teresa, good. Little late, but showed up, all right. Oh, all right, there you go. Not afraid to sit. It's like coming to church. If you're late,
That's right.
no one wants to go to the front. All right. Thanks for letting us know the smartest man in the room finally showed up.
Yes, sir.
Good. Next question.
Next question from the audience. A lot of the services are pushing to unify the tactical and strategic networks. Does Thunderdome help support or speed this unification?
I don't know that it's going to necessarily speed. I think we'll learn a lot more about that one way or the other as we start to get the information back from industry, frankly. Like I said, we were pretty wide open with what we went out there with.
It's going to help with authentication in the tactical space.
It will, however, there is some reliance. In fact, I was just sitting in on a session earlier where somebody asked the great DDoS question, and the gentleman that was speaking went, "Oh, wait, DDoS, shoot." But we have to be mindful of those kinds of things as we roll out. So there are ways to deal with it, and we have to figure out those trade-offs with respect to a completely centralized solution is going to impede us from the DDoS and tactical kind of approach and sort of hurt that unification, if you will. But there are methods that we can use to, when we go into those DDoS environments, create the appearance, if you will, that they are still connected to the enterprise by giving them, cached versions and that kind of thing. So I think that it very much has the potential to do it. I'm just hesitant to stand up and speak in absolutes that, oh yeah, this is going to make it 100% better, because we just don't know entirely yet.
Fair enough. Is there another question?
Sir, we have a number of remaining questions here from the audience.
Okay.
How is DISA using big data analytics to enable Thunderdome's data analysis to identify misconfigurations in controlled data?
So the misconfigurations thing I hadn't necessarily thought through with respect to the systems that will be in Thunderdome. We are looking at a suite of other products outside of the Thunderdome realm that will help us with misconfigurations and those kinds of things. I mean, typically what we see is when we see events, oftentimes they are based on misconfigurations versus 0 days, that kind of thing. Everybody likes the 0 day things are sexy, but really it tends to be human error that creates the most, would you say, is that fair, Angie, in your former job?
Yes.
So, we are looking at products that actually help us to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and fire things through the network to look for vulnerabilities versus trusting a Visio diagram or a set of claims in a white paper from a vendor or that are based on specific configurations. Far too often we rely on those things without actually backing it up and validating the fact that these things, and they may well be set and good one day, and then a technician goes in there and to troubleshoot changes something, and before you know it, we've opened up a hole and created problems for ourselves. So the big data analytics I don't see helping us solve misconfigurations so much, but I do see them helping us point to, because the reality is that's sort of after the fact, right? If you wait for the data to arrive in your big data platform or whatever, your analytic platform, before trying to write an analytic for it and take action on the analytic and all that kind of thing, you're late to the game. Mm-hmm. We need to be a lot more proactive from that perspective. So I don't think Thunderdome necessarily solves that, but we are looking at ways to deal with that in the broader picture. But the analytics component, as both Angie and I had mentioned, is a big component to seeing, to getting the view into the system and how the system's operating and how users are using or potentially misusing the system. So I think that will be a big piece going forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, I didn't have an answer, so I'm
Okay,
glad.
good.
I'm glad you went. I was gonna guess and say maybe SASE could help out with that misconfiguration question, just because it verifies STIG compliance and all other kinds of things.
I have my daughter sitting at home emailing all these questions.
Yeah, I'm
in,
like,
so
great.
I got
Who's
it.
playing Stump the Chimp over here?
All right. Let's take another question.
Thank you. Well, we do now have a question for Dr. Landress.
Oh boy.
Could you expand a little bit on what DISA's unified platform is and some of its capabilities? Are there opportunities for industry to get involved?
So I'll answer the second question first. I think there's always opportunity for industry to get involved. I think there's been a culture shift over the last few years in the DOD partnering with industry. And that's how some of these more flexible contract vehicles have become a thing, right? So rather than trying to solve it by ourselves when maybe we don't have that SME expertise that really is required to understand, the evolution of IT, bringing in industry really helps us solve a lot of problems. So yes, there's absolutely room for industry to get involved always, and you can start by reaching out to, would it be the Mission Partner Engagement Office?
Well,
or
yeah, you reach out through them or
the small business.
The division chief, well, small business, yes. The division chief is Tanisha McMillan, where that program lives at.
Yeah, and as far as DISA's unified platform, we, it's currently network centric. And a bit, fractured, but I think across the board, the entire federal government has a very network-centric approach to security and defense, and Thunderdome's goal is to try to move that forward and evolve it into something that's a lot different and really addresses the threats proactively rather than reactively.
All right, another question.
Thank you. The next question is, under Thunderdome, will the on-premise DISA Acropolis capabilities be migrated to the cloud to improve their performance and cybersecurity posture?
Your turn.
So I have no definitive things to say with respect to the future of Acropolis, but I know that is an interest area for us to how do we modernize Acropolis? How do we take better use of, make better use of the data that's being generated in the cloud today? I mean, we made our move to Office 365, or the department is in the process of making its move, which means that we are generating a tremendous amount of data out there and leveraging a number of the tools that are out there in the various platforms. But so it's with respect to the future of Acropolis, I think that we need to be on a very flexible platform. That's the very kind of system that needs to expand and contract and handle vast volumes of data. So again, I can't say anything definitive about the future of Acropolis, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that we always have our eye on where the heck do we need to go with, specifically platforms like that.
I'll piggyback on that and just say that Thunderdome seeks to really optimize the use of data as a strategic asset. And again, it's a prototype, so we're going to learn a lot through prototyping it out. But being able to kind of like store high value data to optimize like the use of very limited resources that we have is super important. So, while we don't know necessarily the future of Acropolis or DISA's unified platform quite yet, we will be able to prototype, a cyber analytics platform that does get after data modernization strategy and really start to understand how to move forward.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, sir. How will Zero Trust impact our day-to-day operations when users rely heavily on single sign-on with CAC or SIPR credentialing? Will there be a new sign-on methods, or will users have to sign in over and over because SSO will be disabled? Or is this a program at a higher level not visible to the end user?
So we are going to make it as difficult on the user and make them log in every 5 minutes. You have my word. So no, the idea behind Thunderdome, I think, would actually reduce sign-ins even further, right? So and beyond that, like I mentioned before, make us less reliant on the CAC as the single method or the single credential for authentication, right? So and our director, General Skinner, is pushing on us pretty hard on the why the heck do I need to log in, or type in my PIN 7 times when I come in the morning, and my inner engineering geek wants to describe in excruciating detail as to why. But he's right. The reality is, from the user's perspective, they have to type in that PIN 7 times, which is deeply frustrating and annoying for very little value. It didn't change from the last 5 minutes that I typed it in. It's still the same right now. So So yeah, the goal here is to reduce the number of sign-ins as best we can. It's also, though, going to be, Thunderdome alone is not going to fix that. I want to be really clear about that. The applications also need to modernize as well. The applications need to move to, frankly, I don't want to, well, no, I'll say it anyway. Outsourcing that authentication function, and by that I don't mean turn that out to industry. I mean, rather than the application solely handling the function of authentication, handing that off to an authentication provider, which our ICAM program will provide. And that does help to provide that single sign-on experience for that user, and does help to improve that overall session. So it's not just Thunderdome that's going to fix that. The apps have to modernize as well, and that's going to take some time.
Valid, but I would argue that the whole, one of the biggest points of Thunderdome is that you should be able to do the same authentication method anywhere on any device without the use of VPNs. So I'm looking forward to that day because I can't tell you how frustrated I get, and I work at DISA, so.
All right, so we're right about at time. We have a few minutes left, so any like 30-second closing remarks? First Steve, then Angie?
Sure, would you like to go first?
Or Angie, go first, then Steve?
I just, I'll say that I hope, you know, I always tend to focus on security and defense. It's just in my nature. But I think that the user experience is going to benefit a lot from Thunderdome as well. And I hope to hear feedback about how wonderful and awesome your user experience is after we roll this out in a couple, you know, in a little while. I shouldn't give you a timeline because then people hold me to it.
Spoken like a true PM.
I'm like, wait a minute, don't say that, Angie. So yeah, I'm excited to see less latency on the network. I'm excited to see modernized solutions continue to roll out at DISA. I'm excited to see DISA at the forefront of you know, evolving cybersecurity and IT. And I've always loved DISA. I've always been a big proponent of its mission. It's got a huge mission, and so I'm just really excited to see what the future brings, and I hope we get some positive feedback from it.
So one of the topics that we didn't necessarily hit on that I wanted to hit on really quick is who's the target audience for Thunderdome? So the initial target audience, well, our going in position is the fourth estate organizations. Well, the target is the department. We hope that the entire department and all of the services will see value in it. The bottom floor is the fourth estate. So we're working with, and we have a number of the services. We have all the services, I think, involved in the acquisition. So you know, we're really excited about working with the department and making this a department solution. But the other side of the coin is we're also not going to drive to try to force the entire department onto this solution. We want to make it good enough that if you see value in it, you come. And if you don't and you want to go your own route, that's fine too. The concern that we do have with going their own route, and there's one of the services in particular that's already down this road part of the way, so is interoperability. And so to the vendor community that is in here right now, I want to sort of drive there aren't a lot of standards in this space, but we're going to be looking at you for interoperability between these platforms. We can't have 6 different agents running on the endpoint so that users can access data across the department. That isn't going to work. We talked a lot about user experience today. Well, guess what leads to a really bad user experience? More stuff running on the endpoint.
Yes.
So we really need to drive towards interoperability. And again, it's not us trying to force anything on the department. If you see value in it, awesome, please come. If you don't, we're more than happy to work with you and share everything that we glean on our way forward. But I think that's going to be one of the most important things for us going forward. But we are, if you can't tell, extremely excited about this. I've been thinking about this capability for some time, and to actually see it coming to fruition is extremely exciting, and something that all of us at DISA are driving towards. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you. And maybe just to kind of put a bow on this, thanks to AFCEA for allowing us to spend a few minutes today talking about this. It's a big deal for us to talk about. Big moments in history, Defense Enterprise Email. Thank you, General Lawrence, for that. The JRS stack was a big one, and this is at that scale, really, in terms of a big shift in how we do business on the cybersecurity front. And so, although there weren't any charts or anything that you could, copy down the architecture, watch over the next few months, because that's when the down select will happen, and that's when the pilot or the effort will really get underway in a real way in this fiscal year, and then 23 and beyond, big changes. So thank you all for your questions today. Let's give our panel members a hand here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let's give General Yee a hand for putting that panel together. And, I would offer the only thing I could add to what you've done so far is more pizza for for the team.
No more
more
pizza.
salad, less pizza.
All right, that's more salad, but you can sense the passion and the excitement, and really, it's remarkable. So once again, a great panel of professionals focused on the mission, excited by the mission, in fact, and under great leadership. So I see great things ahead in something I knew nothing about. I would point out that in TechNet Cyber, we have coming up last week of October, plus Industry Outreach Day. I imagine this process will have matured a bit more, as you said, in a couple of months, and more information can be provided then. And understand maybe 2 charts, just 2 charts, but really a remarkable set of capabilities. And you've lived this, and I think you've now evolved it into something that's exciting us. So thank you very much for bringing it to our attention today. We have a break now. The lunch is still on. Now let me just run over a couple details after a quick thanks. This next session is at 2:15 in here, and you can go down, grab lunch, be on the floor. But we have a great opportunity to hear from Major General Maria Barrett, Commanding General of NETCOM. Limited overflow seating, by the way, then, so we need you in here early enough to find a good seat and ensure you get a seat to watch this presentation. Her panel will be followed by a Women in Cyber Leadership panel, which will discuss artificial intelligence and other cyber challenges, which will be followed by a reception in the Riverwalk hallway, sponsored by Sienna and Walker Associates. The panel will begin at 4 p.m. That panel will begin at 4 p.m. Again, thank you to General Yee and his panel for joining us here today. In lieu of a speaker gift, AFCEA will be making a donation to the Fisher House on your behalf. For those, you betcha. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, lunch is open downstairs. Please enjoy your time here. The rest, we'll see you this afternoon, please. 2:50. The next opportunity to be in here will be to hear our panel. Thank you.
That's so true.